point that way as negative. His view of history is sophisticated, and he's not deceived by, he really is on a different level than some of what he would call the mediocre intellectuals of his day. Okay, previous solutions. It's not possible to, artificially to solve this problem. Some attempts are too petty, like colonization have been falsely conceived, converting Jews into peasants, like Tolstoy maybe would want to try to people back to nature and so on. Apparently these are movements that were going on in his time. And they didn't prosper, they come to grief. He says about machinery. We know all this, what peasants do now, can be done with machinery. It's interesting again. The agrarian question is only one of machinery. He doesn't think it's bad or good, he's just stating a fact. America must conquer Europe in the same way as a large landed possession absorbs small ones. He means the American way of doing things. That will become the future. And that's, again, very far-sighted. It's just amazing that you can see this. And he speaks about, here's a crossbow, go to war. It's like saying to a Jew or someone, what, with a crossbow while others have small arms and Krupp, it's the big German arms manufacturer, Krupp cannons, and so on. It's really quite charming to hear him talk. Let's see there. The next page, he speaks about the do-gooders of the world, something that I've been, unfortunately, maybe overemphasizing, who send Jews to plow, forget a very important person who has a great deal to say. That person is the peasant. The peasant, that is in Europe, is absolutely in the right for the tax on land, the risks attached to crops, the pressure of large proprietors who produce at cheaper rates, not to mention American competition, all combine to make life more difficult. This still goes on in Europe, where the French peasants complain about the common market policies. Causes of anti-Semitism. And the main current of Jew hatred today is different than previously. It is an outgrowth of the emancipation of the Jews, and that's very insightful to know that the new one, the Hitler one that we're going to come upon in the next century, is actually a direct result of emancipation. I think Pinsker was saying this maybe more eloquently, but Herzl always says it more politically. He's a newcomer to this situation, but he moves quickly, even though he maybe doesn't have the depth of feeling of someone like Pinsker who preceded him. He speaks even in the top of the next page about the spirit of the age. So it's not much different than zeitgeist, than what Pinsker was saying. They freed us, but they didn't really want to do it. They did it because of the spirit of the age. And the very impossibility further along of getting at the Jews nourishes and deepens the hatred of them among the masses, he's speaking. This is interesting. Its remote cause is the loss of our assimilability during the Middle Ages. In other words, we were so confined in ghettos and things like that, and so under our rabbinic control, and so perceived as this separate, odd entity, that we were unassimilable. And its immediate cause, again, our production of mediocre intellectuals. Our Karl Marx's, our Trotsky's, our, those are just the ones that you've heard of. All the other ones that, cause a lot of antagonism in the governments and among and Hitler, again, played on that masterfully, him and people like Goebbels and so on and so forth. Speaks about assimilation on page, bottom of 219, 220. Look, I don't say they should stop assimilating, he says. if they want to. We could perhaps vanish without a trace, top of 220, into the surrounding peoples if they would let us for just a couple of generations. But you see, he's right, you know, totally. This is what happened in Germany. Hitler went and took the people several generations back, inquired into their, you know, genealogies. But they will not let us be. He said they won't allow us. After a brief period of toleration, there are still erupts. Well, we're seeing that in Europe now. There was a brief period of toleration after the Second World War, and now it's back again. The Jews in the form of Israel are the cause of all the problems. So it's just started all over again. I mean, now you may not see it that way. You may think that that's a correct statement. Okay, but from a Jewish perspective, that's how it's seen. You may think whatever you like as far as the political situation in the world, but from the Jewish perspective, yeah, we're the cause of all the problems again. So it's just back to the same old thing in new guise. The plan. Let sovereignty be granted us over a portion of the globe adequate to meet our rightful national requirements, and we will take care of the rest. We don't want your help, we'll do it ourselves. Just give us the sovereignty over a portion of the earth adequate to our needs. Now that's where he comes in conflict with the other Zionists who say it has to be Jerusalem, it has to be Palestine. Herzl is willing to do it almost anywhere for a start. Whether he ultimately wants to go to Palestine, that's another question. And governments who are anti-Semitic will be keenly interested in getting this sovereignty for us. They'd like to get rid of us. And you know something? That's true. Hitler originally was thinking of Madagascar for the Jews. And the British were thinking of Uganda. And later they offered them Uganda. And then they were thinking of, when the Jews turned down Uganda, they were thinking of Sinai. When they had Sinai after, in the 1890s or so. And the poorest will go first, 221, we had that, and cultivate the soil. They will construct the roads, the bridges, the railroads, the telegraph installations, regulate the rivers. You know, he's got it all figured out. Their labor will create trade, trade will create markets, markets will attract new settlers. Very modern economic thinking. If you are someone in the class, in the break told me they were an economics major. And every man will go voluntarily at his own expense, his own risk. You know, if we want to erect buildings, we should not drive a few shaky piles into the marsh like lake dwellers. We should build as men build. Again, that honor idea. In a stately style, in other words, elegant. Again, those in desperate straits will go first, bottom of 221. They will be led by the intellectual mediocrities whom we produce so abundantly. We've got it all figured out. We've got these second-rate intellectuals. Let them lead the masses to this. And who are oppressed everywhere. Anyway, whoever wishes to stay behind, let them. The opposition of a few individuals is quite immaterial. Who would go with us? Let him fall in behind our banner and fight for the cause with word and pen and deed. The Jews who agree with our state idea will rally round the society. It's very Nietzschean, this. If they will it, it will be. Now, if the powers, 222, show themselves willing to grant us sovereignty over a neutral land, and the society, this Jewish agency, will enter into negotiations for the possession of that land. Here, two regions come to mind, Palestine and Argentina. Argentina had not been settled to the extent that it is now. The people were going to Argentina. Significant experiments of colonizations have been made in both countries, though on a mistaken principle of gradual infiltration of Jews. He thinks that's a bad idea. Infiltration is bound to end badly, for there comes the inevitable moment when the government in question, under pressure of the native populace, and that's what happened in Palestine, when the British government, under the pressure of the Arab riots, started to retreat from the promises that were initially given, which feels itself threatened, puts a stop to further influx of Jews. The British did that, can you believe that, in 1937, just when the Jews were at the most dangerous. They closed Palestine to them, sealed the fate of the Jews in Europe, just when they're most needed They did it. That's why there's such animosity to the British in some of these matters. I think your other book has the white paper in it. The white paper was a paper voted on by the British government to stop Jewish immigration to Palestine in the 1930s. Just when, of course, they needed it most. Immigration is futile unless it is based on a guaranteed autonomy. I told you that's why he would not have accepted the Balfour Declaration in the form that I have described it for you. Yeah, if you want to read about this more, read the History of Zionism book. So, and then he says, you know, the very creation of the Jewish state will be beneficial to the neighboring lands, which of course happens since the cultivation of a strip of land increases the value of the surrounding area. What about it? Is Argentina or Palestine preferable? Those seem to be the options at his time. The society will take whatever is given and whatever Jewish public opinion favors. So he realizes that there is that issue. When he goes to the Zionist congresses with the Uganda proposal, he thinks it's a fair proposal, but he's rejected. There's the public opinion among Jews issue. And the infiltration of Jews, whether Argentina or some other place, certainly produces a reaction. Palestine is our unforgettable historic homeland. The name would be marvelously effective as a rallying cry. If His Majesty the Sultan, who the Ottoman Empire was still functioning at that time, were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake the complete management of the finances of Turkey. He's really always seeing, you know, quid pro quo what could happen. We should form a part of a wall of defense for Europe and Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. Well, it's pretty blunt, but unfortunately there may be a lot of prescience even in that statement. You know, a first line of defense against barbarism. The holy place of Christendom could be placed under some form of international extraterritoriality. Conclusion. I don't know whether I could read all this section, but there's one paragraph there or two that may be worth looking at. It might further be said that we ought not to create new distinctions between peoples. We should not raise fresh barriers. We should rather make the old ones disappear. It's a noble thought, he says. I say that those who think in this way are harmless, well-intentioned, amiable, if you like, visionary. The homeland idea will go on flourishing long after the dust of their bones will have scattered without a trace by the wind. See, he's funny, man. He's very harsh. Universal brotherhood is not even a beautiful dream. Conflict is essential to man's highest efforts. That's a Nietzschean idea. But this universal brotherhood, he doesn't even grant that as a beautiful dream that the Reformed Jews are putting in their prayer books. That there's going to be universal brotherhood, you know, ushered in somehow by the reform of Judaism. Who knows what they're putting in their prayer books? He just scoffs at it. You know, I can see why he was not popular in some quarters. Again, worrying about the anti-Semites, 224. Will it not be said I am providing weapons for the anti-Semites? How so? Because I admit the truth? Because I do not maintain there are none but excellent men among us? Is that, you know, as I'm not deluding myself? If the idea at the bottom of the page had been feasible, it would have been done a long time ago, he says, but has never yet been possible. That's the point I was making. Now it is possible with modern technology, modern transportation, modern developments have made it possible. See, people can't see as clearly as he does. 100, even 50 years ago, it would have been fantasy. Well, today it is a reality. And so on. Precisely, the poor and simple have no idea what power man already exercises over the force of nature will have the staunchest faith in the new message, for these never lost their hope in the promised land. Again, talking about the return to Zion. Etc. And I believe, at the bottom of that page, 2:25. A wondrous breed of Jews will spring up from the earth. The Maccabees will rise again. You know, I was just describing that to you a short time ago. And it's true to some extent. Let me repeat, you know, people can't imagine how the Jews could change from a shuffling, seemingly unable to defend. I know when I was young, people where I grew up, I mean, the word Jew was synonymous with coward. And so on. Seemingly cowardly people suddenly become one of the most efficient military peoples in the world. How is that possible? He just says change the parameters, and you change the people. And look at what the Jews were like actually in the Roman period. They were able to be one of the most successful people able to defend themselves of all the ancient peoples till the Romans overpowered them. So that's what it means by the Maccabees will rise again. Let me repeat, again, very Nietzsche, my opening words, the Jews who will it shall achieve it, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he sees that things are going to get worse. He sees a terrible, I think, I'm not sure. I guess it's Jabotinsky who finally puts it in terms of an earthquake of immeasurable proportions is taking shape before us. Jabotinsky will say that. Jabotinsky will be the heir of Herzl. Now, if you go to Israel, you'll hear Jabotinsky maligned by all kinds of people. But again, he's another secular Jewish classic scholar who has a clear view of what is facing them as a people, and some of these other people are totally have an unclear view. And whether you like his program or not, you can't argue with the clarity of what he's seeing. And to some extent, Churchill, Herzl is exemplifying that as well. Look at this speech to the first Zionist Congress he gives here, 1897. Imagine that he could have, in 1 year from the degradation of Dreyfus, get a Zionist Congress into motion. That's how effective he was politically. Here's his speech, fellow delegates. I have been granted the privilege of welcoming you. We have 3 days to do what we've come here to do. This is in Basel, Switzerland, which is between the French and German areas. If you look at a map, it's in a little. I've been to Basel, and it's a little enclave of Switzerland, the northern part, not the mountainous part, in between France and Germany. We want to lay the foundation of the edifices, which is one day to house the Jewish people. Bang, says it right out. We want to lay the edifices of the Jewish state. We shall hear reports of Jews in various countries that will be part of the Congress here. And so on. But today, again, we just heard it, we have the marvels of communication that brought about mutual understanding and union between isolated groups. We know we're surrounded by an old hatred, anti-Semitism, etc., but we have the means to deal with this. Our enemies are quite unaware how deeply they wounded the sensibilities of just those of us who were possibly not the primary objects of their attack. The red part of Jewry, which is modern and cultured, he himself, you see, which has outgrown the ghetto and lost the habit of petty trading, was pierced to the heart. What was he pierced to the heart by? The inability of the nations of Europe to perform on the promises of the Enlightenment and the emancipation. You see, he's so honest there. You know, I represent, he says, just those people who, you know, would have been the first to accept your offers of equality, the most modern and cultured. You cannot, you see that, he explains himself, you cannot imagine the pain and resentment that your, what he saw in the Dreyfus trial and so on, falls among people like myself. And we're the people who are able to do something about it. And he proves it. Again, Zionism has already brought about something remarkable, middle of the next page, heretofore regarded as impossible, a close union between the ultra-modern and the ultra-conservative elements of Judaism. Again, so clear-sighted. Orthodox elements are now united with modern people who are modern, thoroughly modern people. A union of this kind is possible only on a national basis. We Zionists desire, next paragraph, not an international league, but an international discussion. We want to solve the Jewish question. He recognizes in 228 the forerunners of Zionism. They understood the idea of agricultural work for the Jews in Palestine, and also some of the philanthropists were doing that in Argentina. I have to tell you, my father grew up on a farm in New Jersey, and his father was a religious sort of, what we'd call a yeshiva book, or someone who would be studying the Talmud and that sort of thing from the old world. And I never understood how he got there, but I know now that those philanthropists were buying agricultural land in outlying districts of places like New Jersey and settling, you know, people who were from the ghetto in those areas. So my father, unlike his father, grew up. He first went into New York City when he came here. He was born here, but his father had come here 5 or 10 years before him, and his mother came here with 2 or 3 older brothers and sisters from Russian Polish border area. But he was born in like East 100th Street, which is like Coldwater Flats and now part of Spanish Harlem and so on and so forth. But you know, very rundown areas of New York, and somehow they got taken out of that area after he was, you know, 7 or 8 years old, and moved down to a farm in New Jersey out in the boondocks. And it was because of these philanthropic attempts by these financiers to get Jews out into the country working agriculture. That's how that happened. I mean, I don't have it from my family, but now I realize how that occurred. In any case, so that was going on too. And that would be like around 1910 or so. So I'm aware of that. This was never told me in my family, but I'm now able to perceive that that's what was taking place. It would be idle in the middle of the bottom of that page. So well, anyway, Palestine, Argentina. A people can be helped only by its own efforts. That's auto-emancipation. If it cannot help itself, it's beyond help. I mean, the Afro-American situation in America would probably benefit a lot by reading Herzl. Not to turn, I think, into, you know, the black Muslim direction of things, but just to realize that you have to also do it through your own communal help. That, you know, it can't always be given you. Not that your situation is particularly has been good. No, it hasn't been. But you have to also take the reins of this only way to have your own self-respect as well. I think people from a lot of ethnic groups coming to America do understand that. And, it's a shame that the leadership in some communities don't really make that clear. And people who are flourishing don't go back into the communities to provide the support mechanisms that are necessary to develop that. Finally, he said, it would be idle to begin engage in lengthy discussions today regarding the legal form which the agreement will finally assume. That is, this clear charter that he is talking about. But one thing has to be adhered to inviolably. The agreement must be based on right, not toleration. It can't be protection. We don't want George Bush Senior now, offering us missiles. That's what the big mistake the Israelis made in the first Iraq War, letting America, you know, stop them from defending themselves when Scud missiles were landing. That was a huge mistake, morale-wise and every otherwise, that Israel made to put themselves under someone else's protection. You have to defend yourself, what Herzl is saying. And it's not a matter of toleration. We don't want an American umbrella. You know, we will put our own weight, is what Herzl is saying. And indeed, we have had enough experience of toleration and protection, which can be withdrawn at any time which is unfortunately, see, he's very clear. Now this he's saying to the Congress of the delegates from all these countries who are coming to meet. Thus, if we assume that there are 9 million Jews in the world, that it would be possible to colonize 10,000 Jews in Palestine every year, the Jewish question would require 900 years to solve. So at his time, there are 9 million Jews in the world. He estimates. 6 million evaporated. But I think today there are, I don't know how many in America, because I think the numbers are dwindling because of the assimilation that is occurring at a very rapid rate. There used to be 6 million Jews in America. Maybe now there's about 4 million, 4.5 million maybe. So there's 5 million in Israel, and there's about, 2 or 3 million in Europe and so on. So 5, 4, 9, I guess you've got, even with the Holocaust, you've got 10 or 12 million left. Not all particularly conscious of who or what they are. So, well, you see, things aren't so bad. Yeah, but you can imagine how things would be if the Holocaust hadn't happened. There would be, if the Jews have been so successful in Israel as they have been under these circumstances, under the circumstances Herzl envisions, then the Arabs really would have had something to worry about. I don't think they have a great deal to worry about at the moment. Jews aren't going to conquer the Arab countries. Not that they should or ever wanted to. Anyway. On the other hand, you know that to count 10,000 settlers a year under existing circumstances in Palestine is really rather incredible. He's been traveling a bit, he knows the reality. The Turkish government would doubtless unearth the old immigration restrictions immediately. And we could have little to do as a result of that. If anyone thinks the Jews can steal into the land of their fathers, unnoticed, he's deceiving himself or others. Nowhere is the coming of Jews so promptly noted as to their historic home, for the very reason that it is their historic home. That's the interesting thing. Don't think you can just steal into Palestine unnoticed. They're going to notice you, and they're going to be watching you, and you can't do it like that. You have to get clear title. Well, to the areas that you're going into, and the British were supposed to give it, as we'll see momentarily. Then in the last page here, we've done much of Herzl. I think we've done enough, 230. Nowhere can there be a question of an exodus of all the Jews. They just did that in the Jewish state. I say, those who are able or wish to be assimilated can remain behind, let them be absorbed. Only when a satisfactory agreement, that's why it's political Zionism, is concluded with the various political units involved in a systematic Jewish migration begins, systematic modern methods of doing this. It will last only so long in each country as that country desires to be rid of its Jews. How will the current be stopped? Simply by the gradual decrease and final cessation of anti-Semitism. That is the moving force. Anyway. The Jews have come together, next paragraph, from so many lands that the age-old summons of nationality, let our profession of faith be solemnly repeated. Should we not be stirred by a premonition of great events when we remember that at this moment the hopes of thousands upon thousands of our people depend on this assemblance? So again, he understands how important this is. And interestingly, I have another note from his diary here. This is 1897. This is 1896. He's already going around lecturing before the Congresses. Here he's in London. He's on the speaker's platform. If you've ever been on a speaker's platform and other speakers are speaking, you know that you sit there and you kind of daydream a bit. On Sunday, when I sat on the platform, I was in a curious mood. I saw and heard the rising of my legend. It's so funny. The people are sentimental. The masses see there's a lot of poor Jews in East London by this time. The masses do not see clearly. That's where Jack the Ripper was got started in the Jewish areas and prostitute areas of London. And, the East End of London is what it was called. That's the same period as Jack the Ripper period. I believe that even now they no longer have a clear idea of me. A light mist has begun to beat about me, which will perhaps deepen into a cloud in the midst of which I shall walk. But even now, if they no longer see my outline clearly, at least they understand that I mean well for them. I am a man of the poor. That's so interesting. Even in 1896, it's just begun, the whole thing. And he sees that his legend has already started to occur. That they're sentimental. And they don't have a clear idea. A light mist is beating about me. He's so poetic. Epiphanies and all. Okay, now, another thinker in the Herzl mode is this fellow we have here called Max Nordau. Now, Nordau was a very educated English Jewish individual. His dates are 1849 to 1923. What are Herzl's dates again? Let's see if we go back here now. 1860 to 1904. So this fellow is about, I guess you would say that he's about 10 years older and lives 20 years longer. So all in all, he lives 30 years. He's 30 years longer lived than Herzl is. And though he's older than Herzl, he is one of Herzl's disciples. So this is the impression Herzl made on people. This Nordau was also probably from a well-to-do family in England. And as he says in his write-up here, when he came to England to expound his Zionist ideas, 234, there's a story, maybe apocryphal, that Herzl came to Nordau, and after several days of conversation, Nordau supposedly said to him, "If you are crazy, then so am I." He'd also been present at the degradation of Dreyfus on the parade ground at the École Militaire, and had been equally affected emotionally by the anti-Semitic outcries of the crowd at the scene. But he had deeper roots even than Herzl in his Judaism and so on. Anyway, his allegiance to the idea gave it a stamp of approval, according to Hertzberger. You know, after Herzl's collapse in 1904, he became estranged from the new leadership of the movement, that is Nordau, but he remained, as he puts it, an uncompromising messianism, contemptuous both of philanthropic, that is rich people's financing Zionism, and cultural Zionism. Now, we haven't had cultural Zionism yet. Mr. Bush and I were talking about cultural Zionism at one of the breaks. Ahad Am is the individual who will be this mouthpiece of cultural Zionism. Now here is another opponent of cultural Zionism, which seems to have taken sway after Herzl's death more than it had previously. And Nordau is what he calls in this a messiness. Hertzberg, the editor of this collection, is himself somewhat of a cultural Zionist, as I told you. Now, I guess you would say that Herzl is not a practical Zionist according to the definition here on 234. As he's putting it here, a practical Zionist is someone who subordinates political ends to the immediate work of building up the country. In other words, get on with it, establish the facts, and leave the politics to come. So practical Zionism, that is a third way. I was thinking that political Zionism and practical Zionism are basically the same thing. But practical Zionism is more like the kibbutz movement, where people just go and don't worry about the politics or the clear charter or not clear charter, just, you know, buy the settlement land, get on with the settlement process, drain the swamps, the malaria swamps, start the modern cultivation practices, bring in the socialist, settlements, kibbutzim, or kibbutza is a Hebrew word meaning cooperative, so it is a socialist idea implanted into the Zionist movement. He says Nordau and the political Zionists were not too happy about that. And he was, as I would well imagine, very impatient with the Balfour Declaration phraseology, as he puts it. And he says at the end here, though Nordau knew that conditions in Palestine were not ripe to receive large numbers, he still demanded it should be done, even if many would suffer, because evacuation was better than death. And the creation of a Jewish majority in Palestine, which would result, was more important than careful colonization. So Jabotinsky would follow him, he says. For some reason, he was living in Paris. I don't understand how that is or came about, but since he is an Englishman, but you can read that further if you want. Here's Nordau's address to the First Zionist Congress, after or along with Herzl. I don't know if if there's anything here that is too different than Herzl. The Jew in the first paragraph thinks naively that he's a human being, and therefore he should be treated like all other human beings, you know, on an equal basis. But look, the rights of man proclaimed by the French Revolution have to be enjoyed cautiously. You lack true honor, duty, morality, patriotism, all these qualities. Therefore, we're not going to share the rights of man with you, speaking in the voice of the European nations as he is describing it. And so on. 238, middle of the page. All Jewish customs and practices unconsciously pursued one sole purpose, to preserve Judaism by separation from the non-Jews, to maintain the Jewish community, and to keep reminding the individual Jew that he would be lost and perish if he gave up his unique character. This was the source of the ritual laws according to him. Anyway, once again, like Herzl, 239, he says that it's anti-Semitism which is the driving force. It revealed to a mortified Jew who thought anti-Semitism was gone the true picture of his situation. So I guess the Arab Muslims in Europe are encountering the same problem at the moment in Europe. He flees from his Jewish fellow because anti-Semitism has taught him to be contemptuous of them and so on, but his Gentile compatriots repulse him as he attempts to associate with them. He has lost his home in the ghetto, in the land of his birth. He's denied to him as his home. He's speaking now as an English person who maybe originally came from Eastern Europe. This is the Jewish spiritual misery in 1900 or 1897. The emancipated Jew, the bottom of 239, is insecure in his relations with his fellow man, timid with strangers, suspicious. His best powers are dissipated. He has become like a cripple within and a counterfeit person without. Something unreal. Okay, so I think we get the flow of Nordau, very similar to Herzl, maybe even to some extent more eloquent. 241, the middle of the end of that paragraph. The contrary, it is their misfortune that as soon as the first word of emancipation was uttered, they tried to make room for national patriotism as their exclusive loyalty by tearing out their hearts any trace of Jewish solidarity. What he's saying there again is that when the promises of emancipation were extended to the Jews, they immediately ran and reformed Judaism and ripped out their own patriotism out of their hearts. Ripped out the prayer for Zion and any national elements in Judaism. Here in page 242, he has another essay where he talks about political Zionism. The new Zionism, which is to be called political, differs from the old Messianic variety in that it disavows mysticism. So why Hertzberg calls this person a Messianist, I don't know, because he says he isn't. That is, that Palestine will be brought about by a miracle. Rather, we want to prepare the way by our own efforts. And 243, I think he correctly puts the issue here. And this still exists in the Jewish world. It has not been solved. The one point which excludes probably forever the possibility of understanding between Zionist and non-Zionist Jews is the question of Jewish nationality. That is the sticking point. Whoever maintains and believes the Jews are not a nation can never be a Zionist. He cannot join a movement which has as its sole purpose the desire to normalize a people which is living and suffering and so on. He was convinced to the contrary that the Jews are a people must necessarily become a Zionists, as only the return to their own country can save them, which is save the Jewish nation, which is everywhere hated, persecuted, and oppressed, from physical and intellectual destruction. Well, he and Herzl see that obviously equivalently. Jews, and especially in the West, have completely broken with Judaism in their hearts, and they will probably soon do so openly, all the conversions that we have seen. And if they don't break away, their children or grandchildren were. Disraeli is a perfect example. The people desire to be completely assimilated among their Christian fellow countrymen, and they resent it when other Jews proclaim that they are a people. And so, that is really a big thing. It's still going on today. You might even see it right here on this campus. You probably could even see it in our department, in the religious studies department, if you looked carefully. That issue is still on the table. I think it's obvious that the Jews are a people. Whether they want to remain a people is something else. That's the issue today. The Jews are a people like the Japanese are a people, like the Germans consider themselves a people, like you name it, like the Italians consider themselves a people, like even the Mexicans consider themselves a people, though they're made up of a mixture of peoples, obviously. So the Jews are a people. The question is, do they want to remain a people or give up their people? And everyone who comes to America has to face that question, of course. I mean, now there is a Korean nation. If you are a Korean, you can return to Korea. But, you know, a lot of Koreans prefer to become Korean Americans. I mean, the Afro-American is in a much more difficult situation because Africa is a country or continent which has many intrinsic problems that are not easily solved in the present political and social and economic circumstances. Not the least among them is the problem of disease and so on, but also poverty, etc. So Afro-Americans really don't have a big choice to go back to Africa. They really, I think, don't, and the countries of Africa now, the continent of Africa has split up into different countries that they don't have any nationality or connection with. So their problem is much more complex. They really don't have an ability to go back to a country. There are, what, 30 African countries? Again, I raised the issue. Should there be 30 African countries and no Jewish country? I don't think so, frankly. I'm happy that there are 30 African countries. I don't begrudge them anything. But why do they begrudge one Jewish country in the world? That's what I ask. That's what these people are. I mean, it just seems to me, just what the big issue is, I fail to understand, and why people have such a big issue over it. The Jews are ogres, cruel. They want to put people in gas chambers. They want to annihilate people. They want to, you know, no, of course not. They're just trying to survive and defend themselves with a minimum of force possible. They could nuke the whole Middle East if they wanted to. They have the weapons, the missiles, and everything else to do it. And the others don't. They could easily just vaporize whole areas of the Middle East. They don't even think in those terms. So all this anti-Semitic, you know, description of Israel is just ridiculous, preposterous. I know Israel, the people there are not perfect or good or bad, but they don't have any idea to try to be cruel or hateful to anybody. None of them have that aspect of their character. So, you know, I just don't understand what is the big problem. It's just people are making a big problem. It's a kind of Jew baiting again. They're making a big problem, and suddenly there's a Palestinian issue of people. There never was a Palestinian people before there was an Israel state. Didn't exist a Palestinian people. They were part of the larger Arab area of Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. But there wasn't a Palestinian entity as such before the British created it. and there wasn't a Palestinian people. Now we have, all the Palestinians have done is absorb all the Jewish national ideas and applied it to themselves. Great, okay, fine. You have a right to do that. But I mean, in the general, bigger, larger scheme, should there be, I don't know how many Arab countries there are, again, I ask, should there be 21 Arab countries instead of 20, and not one secure Jewish country? Is that what there should be? Yet all the intellectuals of the world seem to think that. All the Noam Chomskys, who himself is Jewish, as usual, the biggest anti-Semites are often the turncoat Jews themselves. And, you know, and there are myriads of these people around who think that no, the Palestinian peasant, his rights must be more important than a people who have been in existence for 3,000 years. The Palestinian peasant's rights are not being undermined by a Jewish state. They're often undermined by his own leadership in other Arab countries who don't give the peasants any rights at all, and mistreat the lower classes in an amazing degree. Look at Iraq. Look at Syria. Even Lebanon, where they just killed the Lebanese Christian leader and so on. Yesterday, or was it today? And that family is a tragic family. And his uncle was killed. He was going to be prime minister of Lebanon, and he was bombed 25 years ago. Now the next descendant in that family is killed. And is there a session in the UN to complain about it? I don't think so. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it just amazes me that this thing that we're talking about here is not just obvious. Why is it such a problem? And I think you have to ask yourself. And when you hear people marshal all the intellectual reasons why there shouldn't be a Jewish entity, well, so we should have 20 African countries in Africa? Are there 20 African nationalities or whatever? I don't know the number of African countries. So that is justice? Should there be 25 South American countries? All Spanish-American speaking peoples, mostly Spanish, one Portuguese-speaking area, but mostly Spanish-speaking entities? Should we have an Argentina, Uruguay, Venezuela, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, Guatemala, and so on? People don't question these countries. They just accept it, don't they? Does anyone question them? No, that's fine. And I'm not against them, I don't begrudge them. I only ask, why does everyone accept them and you cannot accept a Jewish state? Ask yourself that question. You know, it really is, now to me, after the Holocaust and what I'm seeing happening in the world at the moment, you know, I sound like a fanatic and crazy person. It just seems bizarre to me. I just do not understand it. Can't. And I will not be able to. Maybe you'll be able to understand it and can explain it to you. Okay. The Zionists on page 244 know they have undertaken a work of unparalleled difficulty in the middle and bottom of the page. Never before has an effort been made to transplant several million people peacefully and in a short space of time. What gives Zionists the courage to begin this labor of Hercules is the conviction that they are performing a necessary and useful task of work of love and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he thinks it's going to be peaceful and he thinks it has to be done in a short period of time. Well, I guess that doesn't occur. All right, Hana we'll look at next time. Let me just take, before you go off, let's just, since we're reading people of the same mindset, let's quickly take a look at where is this American Supreme Court judge who was Wilson?
Brandeis?
Brandeis and Silver. Where's Brandeis? Can you see? Can you
514.
What is it?
514.
514. So he's 1856 to 1941. It's a similar, he lives a very long time, but he's born around the same time Herzl is, you see. So he, his people left Czechoslovakia in 1848 after the failure of the uprisings there. And he was born in America. And he got into the problem of the Lower East Side as a lawyer, where there was a large Jewish population had accumulated from immigration, and the conditions, work conditions were pretty bad. Anyway, let's see if we can. He got also, because for some reason in the legal process that occurred there, he became pretty well known, got onto the bench, and for some reason Wilson, who was a person very close to him as a lawyer, I guess maybe had done legal services for him, put him on the Supreme Court. So you wouldn't think that such a person would be interested in Herzlian Zionism. But he, like Nordau, was impatient with cultural work in the diaspora, the idea of cultural Zionism. So here we have a short little excerpt from his thinking. This is 1950, even before he goes on to the Supreme Court of the United States. Just to get the tenor of his thinking. He says there are 14 million Jews in the world. So I guess he would say that Herzl had the numbers wrong. I think probably we can rely more on Brandeis's figures, because this is 15 or 20 years after Herzl. How can Herzl say there, what, 9 million, did he say? In 1897, and he says here in 1915 there are 14 million. See, if there are 14 million, that means that there were more then really than there are now. And that has to do with natural, increase and so on. So you see, I think now there are around, between 9 and 12 million. So he says there were 14 million. Anyway, he said Palestine couldn't accommodate that number. Maybe a third of them, he thinks, could be accommodated by that number. Zionism seeks to establish in Palestine for such Jews as choose to go and remain there for the sentence of legally secured home and lead, where they can live together, lead a Jewish life, where they can expect ultimately to constitute a majority of the population, and may look forward to what we would call home rule. The Zionists seek to establish this home in Palestine because they're convinced that the undying longing of Jews is blah, 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 blah. You see, he's speaking about home rule, homeland, not a national state. It's really interesting because he's a close advisor of Wilson. And when the British, just like in World War II, launched their campaign in Palestine and issued the Balfour Declaration, one of their motives is to bring America into the war. And they think that since Brandeis is an advisor to Wilson, that this will help the process move forward. So they use the homeland language that is familiar here in this essay that we already see from Brandeis, which is pretty interesting, actually. I don't know if it's significant to you or not. He says in the next page that the Zionist movement is essentially practical, not idealistic. So I'm not so wrong in saying that political Zionism is similar to practical Zionism. I don't think those things are totally clear. The next page, he says there are 40 self-governing Jewish colonies in Palestine. He's listing the objections. He's also, 519, speaking of the revival of the Hebrew language, and that what we need is to build the superstructure there. He talks about America here at the bottom. Man is a better citizen of the United States for being also a loyal citizen of his state and his country. Every Irish American who contributes toward advancing home rule is a better man, a better American. The same for a Korean or a Japanese or any other one. So he understands on page 520 that America is full of nationalities. And there's no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to your original country. So I think you can read Brandeis pretty much yourself. Here he says, the Jewish spirit, again, we're back in the world of Judaism, so The product of our religion experience is essentially modern, essentially American, not since the destruction of the temple of Jews in spirit and ideas in so fully harmony with the noblest aspirations of the country in which they live. Well, he's being a propagandist here. I'm not sure that. He talks about America's demand for social justice in the 20th century in the middle of that page. Indeed, loyalty to American demands rather than each American Jew become a Zionist. Well, that's pretty advanced thinking for Jewish Americans. I don't think we'll find many thinking like that. And he's on the Supreme Court, one of the most highly respected Supreme Court justices. 521. In the Jewish colonies of Palestine, that's when they'd already set up the agricultural colonies, there are no Jewish criminals because everyone, old and young, is led to feel the glory of his people and his obligation to carry forward its ideals. I think that's probably, it's overstated, but it's probably true. He says in 522, at the end of this little piece, that there are 3 million Jews in America. And a larger population than any other country except Russia. Well, probably Poland too. Anyway, he insists that we are loyal to America, can never be questioned. And at the bottom of the page he says, let us therefore lead earnestly, courageously, and joyously in the struggle for national liberation. Let us recognize that we Jews are a distinctive nationality of which every Jew, whatever his country, his station, and shade of belief, is necessarily a member. Let us insist the struggle for liberty shall not cease until equality of opportunity is accorded to nationalities as to individuals. Let us insist also that full equality of opportunity cannot be obtained by Jews until we, like members of other nationalities, shall have the option of living elsewhere or of returning to the land of our forefathers. And at the end, organize, 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 because he's a labor organizer type person. Well, that's an American Zionist, a very high level, very famous American, and pretty Herzlian, I think, in his outlook. Next time, we'll look at Ahad Eisenman, the cultural Zionists, and take a look at those, see if you can read those folks, and we'll pick up their next lecture. Do we have a sign-up sheet? Did anyone pass that around? I didn't get it either. No one passed it around. Let's do it then.